All right. So yeah, first thing first, I figure I'll go ahead and just cover some basic knife etiquette, just to make sure you're one, taking care of your knife in the kitchen, but also making sure that you're operating safely so you don't cut yourself. Um, one thing that I want to really touch on is proper holding of the knife. A lot of people don't necessarily know this, but anytime you're working with a chef's knife, a lot of people have a tendency to place their index finger somewhere along this blade. And a couple of reasons you don't want to do that. One is that it will cause you to sometimes stick your hand out a little bit far toward the blade and lead you to be a little more prone to cutting yourself. But also when you're putting your finger up here, you don't have as much control, so you really want to be able to drive your knife down into whatever you're cutting. Putting your finger up here causes it to rock back and forth and will cause a lot more slippage. So anytime you're holding your knife, everybody's a little bit different. I'm left-handed, so everyone, again, has their own preferences, but I grip it right about here. You want to essentially have your hand right here. That way you have very firm control of it. It won't slide or go anywhere, and you can do really good precision work with that. Another extension of that is anytime you're slicing, it's always recommended to make sure that you're running against your knuckles and use what they call a claw grip or a pinch grip. And that will just keep you from very simply cutting off fingers. If you have a very sharp knife, it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's generally thought that using a very sharp knife is safer. But of course, if you're not careful, it's that much easier to go through your fingers. So using that claw grip and really just taking your time when you're cutting will prevent a lot of issues. The one bad cut I've had was on my index finger many years ago working at a sushi bar, and it was just because I was moving too quickly. I wasn't really practicing proper steps and doing the thing that sometimes people will do where they cut while they're holding something in your hand, which you should just never ever do, especially working with avocado or just anything small like that. Put it on the board. If you have something, say, like an onion or anything that can roll, slice it in half, then you're cutting. That way it can just sit firmly on the cutting board and won't move around, which can, again, lead to accidents. So, those two things it takes time to set in. Of course, if you're going too quick, it's easy to just want to kind of move through it and not really think about it and just kind of stick your hands wherever works. But again, just bearing these things in mind, do your best to always practice them, and it will save you a lot of issues down the road. So moving on to actually prepping the knife, this is a blade that I gave my housemate. Now, it doesn't really have any bad chips, a little bit of indentation right here, a little bit of wear right here, but I'm going to go through sharpening this one. Now, they will have sometimes these little sharpeners you can get from the store that has like two edges that you run your blade through that, it will do something, but it takes a lot of material off. And so if you have a knife that you're really trying to maintain, especially if you really want to get a sharp edge on it, stay away from those. They're really not anything you want to waste money on. And again, they take so much metal off that too long going that knife. So I have a set of ceramic sharpening stones from Shapton. I use the 1500 right here. This is the 5000 right here. And then this one right here is the 8000 grit. Again, since this doesn't have anything too bad in it, I won't really need to do too much with the 1500, but still it shortens the time that it takes to get to your perfect edge. So I still like working with it. 1500, I think, is kind of a good sweet spot. Typically, you'll find them like the Amazon sharpening stones. You'll find where, let's say, 1000 on one side and 6000 on the other, which is, it'll get the job done. But I think 1500 is better because it helps you kind of bridge that gap from the lower levels to the higher levels without it taking quite so much time. So with this, a couple things. I don't have my glove with me, but because you want to have the blade so close to the stone, I recommend using one of those cut-resistant gloves. For whatever hand is going to be moving along the stone, whatever hand will be holding the knife, you don't really need one. But the reason I say that is that you typically want to essentially, when you're sharpening the knife, you'll have it go flat and then lift it up from the stone about halfway up your thumb, not too far. Having it about halfway up your thumb will give you, I think it's more or less like a 15, 16 degree edge on both sides as you work it. So with this, I typically keep a little spray bottle of water, keep the stone wet. I like to... I'm sorry, was that a question? No? Okay. So yeah, I like to make sure that I soak the stones for at least 10, 15 minutes before I sharpen. With sharpened stones, you don't need to go as far. If you find these stones on Amazon, for example, I would recommend soaking those for 15, 20 minutes, but stone is going to have slightly different recommendations on what they tell you. I feel that it's better just to soak it and make sure you keep that surface wet because it helps form what's called the slurry on the stone. It's not so much the stone that's sharpening your knife, it's that slurry working in conjunction with the stone that helps sharpen your knife. And again, keeping it super wet, I think makes it a lot easier. Starting with this, essentially all you want to do is, again, lift it up and just drag it toward you very lightly, and then push even lighter. So essentially the sharpening action is happening as you're bringing it toward you, and then you push back. And I would say I like to do, I don't know, I don't really count, but I usually do at least 30 passes per section as I'm working my way up the blade and back down the other side of the blade. But it's really just going to depend on how much you've beaten up your knife. This one, again, is in really good shape. There are no bad chips, so it doesn't really need that much time on this one. I would say I would go ahead and do the 25, 30 passes on the higher grip stones. This one, again, doesn't really need that many, maybe 10 to 15. So I'll go ahead and start here and just show you really quick how it goes. As you're starting, it can feel a little bit tricky. It's very easy to second guess yourself and wonder, like, am I even doing this right? But it's really not that bad. It's really not that bad. When I first started, it was a lot more daunting than it feels now. And I only taught myself like 5 or 6 months ago, so it's not like I have years and years of doing this to finally get it. But yeah, it's very easy. I think it's very therapeutic to go through the process. And you just keep working back and forth. And eventually, as you go, it's going to be a little bit hard to see on camera, but you'll notice this very fine metal slurry that starts to build up. And that is what helps us form our edge. And for the sake of this class, of course, I won't go through the full training. It takes quite a bit of time. But again, just work at it that way all along the blade, just being very careful. I have a tendency to drag my thumb on the stone, which is why I wear the glove. If you're mindful about not running along the stone, then you don't really have to wear it. But if you do, if you're not mindful of it, it's very easy to just kind of sand down part of your thumb, which is just a part of it sometimes. But again, if you want to avoid that, I say wear the glove. But yeah, I would say, with this, if it's a rougher knife, again, 25 to 30 passes. If it's not so bad on a lower grit knife, then, maybe 10 to 15. And one thing too, whenever you're done using each stone, I would recommend rinsing off your stone and rinsing off and wiping your blade because you don't want to transfer the metal filings onto the next stone. These are also pretty easy to clean, I found. Some stones you have to scrub a little bit more because they can kind of become clogged and they won't take the metal off as easily. These, I can usually just scrub these with one of those blue dish pads, the more abrasive side, and it takes it out. So they're pretty low maintenance. You do sometimes have to flatten them. Now, I didn't have to flatten out of the box. I would say every 5 to 7 sharpenings, you'll want to flatten your stone, and you can find that on Amazon as well. I just bought this, I think it was Sharpstone who makes this one. It's just this diamond grit Sharpstone. It has a less abrasive side and a more abrasive side. And it's pretty simple. You'll soak it the same as if you're going to sharpen your blades. But instead of course, doing any sharpening, just do a pencil grid. Any kind of pencil, just do a basic grid, and then start sharpening away with your other stone. And the reason you want to do that is that it helps you spot any areas where it's not perfectly level because, as you're sharpening, best practice is to make sure you're using the full surface of the stone, but inevitably you're going to have areas that start to kind of form divots. So by going and re-leveling it, you'll make sure that you have an optimally sharp blade. Because I mean, everybody has their preferences. Some people like to go really, really fine if they're doing cuts like brunoise or fine brunoise. And brunoise, of course, is 1/8 inch by 1/8 inch dice. Fine brunoise is 1/16 of an inch by 1/16 of an inch dice. But I don't know. Some people like that. I think that taking it up to an 8,000 is perfectly fine. So yeah, hold on one sec, actually. This is one thing about it. But yeah, once you take it through the sharpening, you want to, I already mentioned about wiping it down. So again, you'll wipe it down once you've taken it through the final sharpening step. And then you will use, there are a couple different tools for this. I like to use this little leather strop. It's on a little wood block. It has little rubber pads to hold it in place, which helps. And then it has this polishing compound. And so after you take it through the full sharpening, you will then just rub it very gently on both sides through this polishing compound. And then, I just usually wipe it off with a towel. Again, you want to just make sure it's nice and clean. And yeah, it's, let me go ahead and flip up for the chat in case anyone has any. Okay, good. I'll go ahead and pause really quick. I know I'm kind of going through this quickly, but I'm trying to speak simplistic on it, at least as much as I can. Does anyone have any kind of questions or anything they'd like me to elaborate on for this section?
What's the green stuff?
I don't know specifically what it is. It is a polishing compound that came with my little leather strop. Now, this one is Russel's, but there are plenty of other brands on Amazon that are all sufficient. Excuse me. But yeah, it just essentially, it's kind of like using, what are those called? Sorry, I'm spacing on the word, but essentially the green stuff is just for the polishing of the blade. It just helps you to finish the sharpening process.
Okay.
And also, I'm going to move on to knife cuts as well. And I'll be using a knife that I typically use. This is my kind of daily knife. The other one, like I said, is just a friend's. And I did a sharing with potatoes. So when you're practicing your knife cuts, I mean, everything cuts a little bit different. Everything's going to have different feel to it as it slides through. But when your knife's really sharp, you shouldn't have all that much resistance. Again, like I said earlier, a very sharp knife is definitely safer. You can still, of course, get hurt, but a sharp knife isn't going to gouge the flesh as much. So your wounds will also be cleaner, less prone to infection. So just all around, it's better to work with. Now, with a potato, you're not going to have a whole lot of resistance. So again, they're really good to begin with. They're also cheap. So, if you mess up on them, it's not like you're spending all that much money. So when you're wanting to practice your cuts, I would recommend just make essentially a rectangle, because you can do a lot just out of that rectangular block. Whenever I first started my culinary program, that's what they had us practice on. So go ahead and just break that down real quick. And so with this, again, you always want to practice your claw grip. Potato digs in very easily on, but again, with anything round, like onion, for example, always make sure that you're cutting in half and then do your breaking down from there, just so it doesn't slide on you and risk rolling your fingers underneath the blade. So yeah, with this, it's, I don't know. I guess it kind of depends on how people like approaching it. I like just starting off with the 1/4 inch cut, going all the way down. And some blades, so mine doesn't have it as much. Mine has a very basic hammer pattern that doesn't really do a good job of releasing. Sometimes you'll find blades that will have little recessed divots all the way along the blade, and that's just to kind of prevent what you saw a moment ago, where the potato just wants to stick to it. Mine doesn't really have that, so everything just wants to adhere to it, but some will, some kind of help in that regard. And so with your typical bâtonnet cut, bâtonnet cut is a quarter-inch by quarter-inch by, I think, 2.5 inches. And that's what you'll typically call your French fry cut. Then you have your julienne, which is brought down to 1/8 inch by 1/8 inch, but 2.5 inches. And it's not even that it has to be 2.5 inches. There's a range when they teach us. It's like 2.5 to 3.5. So I guess it just depends on what your personal preference is. And then you have your small dice, which is going to be quarter-inch by quarter-inch. You have your half-inch dice, which is going to be half-inch, or I'm sorry, your medium dice rather, which is half-inch by half-inch. And then your large dice, which is 3/4 of an inch by 3/4 of an inch. Going down smaller, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, you have your brunoise, which is 1/8 inch by 1/8 inch dice. So essentially, when you're doing your brunoise, you bring it to the julienne cut, and then you'll just chop it down from there. And whenever you're doing your small dice, you're essentially bringing it to bâtonnet, and then likewise cut it down from there. So it helps you. I guess it kind of depends on how you want to do it. And when you're starting off, of course, it's going to be a little bit sloppier. But by doing it that way, it helps you get more precise cuts. That we're not, again, taking too much time working through each one. But if you say cut it in the way that I have right here, just cut it into even planks, then they're going to be identical to each other as long as you don't let them slide down. And so that gives you an idea of what small dice will come out to. It kind of depends on what you do with those. Small dice is a cut that I will use, like recently, when I was doing an etouffee preparation. Small dice is a good one because it's tinier, so it gives you a good bite, but it doesn't dominate each mouthful too much. But it also isn't so small that will break down. Whenever you're working with, especially something like a potato, I wouldn't really do a brunoise cut because it's just going to kind of melt into whatever you're working with. Brunoise, and especially fine brunoise, are really good whenever you want it to mesh with whatever you're making, especially if you're making sauces. Then you would say brunoise cut your shallots or your garlic, because again, it just, as it cooks, it just wants to break down and then marry into whatever you're making. But yeah, it's not that daunting. It's one of those things that, and I mean, of course, I'm getting better myself, right? I'm still working on it and learning, but knife cuts are one of those things that you just have to get in there and do it. It's just that repetition, and most importantly, take your time. If you let yourself get stressed out and if you're trying to go quickly, you're going to be prone to accidents. But I've also noticed with myself, when I'm trying to go quickly, my cuts end up sucking. So just really take your time, and they will inevitably get better. But again, start with a sharp knife. Having a sharp knife is so fundamental, because if you don't, not that you can't still get your cuts. I mean, I'm sure you can get them, but they're just going to be a lot harder. Especially if you're working with anything that really wants to fight your blade going through it, like peppers and so on. So I'll go ahead and pause really quick. Again, I'm trying to keep it pretty simplistic, but is there anything anything people would like me to demonstrate? Any questions you guys might have? I did also pick up some bell peppers, so I can discuss and show breaking those down if you would like. I can also talk about prepping an onion and how you break that down into small dice if you would like. Really happy to go with whatever everyone would like here.
I'd be interested in seeing how you do an onion.
Sure. So with onions, typically the best way to do it, I mean, I know I used to be very guilty of always trying to peel it before I did any kind of prep work, but I've learned it's easiest just to take the whole onion without doing any kind of peeling and just slice through it. Now, they can be a little bit tricky to break through that first layer of the skin. So you sometimes want to brace it the way I'm doing, but again, just be mindful never to roll your fingers underneath it. And then from here, it gives you a new stable platform to work from. You want to peel off, of course, the top couple layers. And so whenever I'm prepping it kind of depends on what you're wanting to do with it. If you're going to do like a lyonnaise cut, and lyonnaise cut is essentially just really thinly sliced, pretending this root end isn't on here. If we just say that's not there, you essentially just cut it in half, and then you'll work your way down along the body of it. Lyonnaise is really good if you're doing soups, or something that you want the onions to just kind of melt into, but still have a bit of body to them. Now, for what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to leave the root end on. I'll go ahead and cut it off on the next one to just give an idea of what lyonnaise is. But here, you keep the root end on and cut off this side of it because it helps retain the structure as you're working your knife through it. So if we say we're going to do, a medium dice, you'll start right about here and then just work your way through the body. And it looks like that first cut I went a little bit too far. But yeah, you just work your way through the body of it, spaced out again, about half an inch in between each cut. And then you also want to, and this is why it's really important to have a sharp knife, because you want to take your knife through horizontal through the body of the onion. And it's going to depend a little bit on how big your onion is. With one this size, I'd say we want to take it like right here and then right about here. And then from there, you'll cut about here. And that way it breaks down pretty quickly into uniform sizes. Now, going on to a lyonnaise cut, you'll again want to, of course, peel it. The only time you wouldn't want to peel is if you're making stocks or whatnot. But in this case, we want to go ahead and peel it all. And then we will take off that root end that I was talking about. And then from here, it's again pretty simple. Just rest against your fingers, and it helps you give you that control. And again, having a very sharp knife makes this process easy. But yeah, you just kind of follow the angle of it and work your way down. And you get these really fine strands that are great for making soft, soups. I just made pomme boulanger, which is just a onion and potato dish, and this is the cut that you use because again, it will retain its shape. So you'll still have some body with it, but it's not the dominant thing in the dish. Really, the potatoes are what's showing there. So I will go ahead and pause again. Is there anything else that you guys might like to ask about?
Okay, so when I do a lot of my cuts,
Yeah. How's a medium dice?
my knife, and I'm guessing it's my hand or something, it ends up wider than it did at the top. Would that just be my hand positioning? Is there anything I can do to correct that?
So you're essentially saying that it just tends to flare out as you're cutting?
Yep.
Well, I guess it kind of depends on everyone's preference. I think the biggest thing is just proper posture as you're working. Sometimes I have a tendency to kind of turn like this, and it's something I'm going to really get better about. Proper posture over the board and using your hand to run the blade will really help give you better control there. Also, having a really sharp knife. I definitely think that will play a part. You can still get straight cuts without a super sharp blade, but it does, in my opinion, tend to travel a lot more when it's not, at least as sharp as you can reasonably get it.
So what's the difference between a medium dice and any other size of dices?
So there are several, so like you have, when you're going down to your smallest side, you have what's called fine brunoise, which is 1/16 of an inch by 1/16 of an inch dice. And fine brunoise is what you'll do whenever you want. It's what you'll see in fine dining restaurants when they're doing a really nice sauce. That's really the use there because it's so tiny that it's almost pulp, but not quite. And so from that, you then have the 1/8 inch by 1/8 inch dice, and that's called brunoise. You then have your 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch, and that is your small dice. You then have the 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch, which of course is the medium dice. And medium and large dice are what you use whenever you want to have some texture. When you really want whatever that ingredient is to be a significant part and show off the flavor of the item. Now, kind of aside to that, a personal thing that is kind of a bone to pick I have with a lot of places is they like to do al dente vegetables, just cooked vegetables whenever they're doing that medium or large dice. I don't think that works as well. I personally prefer to saute my vegetables when they're that size because I feel like you get a little bit too much of the kind of earthy bitterness that's present in a lot of veggies, but I think that also depends on your personal palate, right? Some people like that. So that's just a personal thing for me. I think it's better to saute than necessarily steam vegetables. If I'm making, say, a Thai curry, always saute my vegetables rather than just steaming them and then putting them into the curry because it really adds a nice depth of flavor to it, in my opinion. But yeah, medium dice, again, it's there are other uses for it, but it's largely, one that I would use in soups, or again, things like curry where you really want each component to be able to stand out and shine on its own. When you're doing small dice and really anything tinier than that, it's just going to kind of blend into whatever you're making.
Okay, so how do I count the 1/2 inch is to know the difference between whether or not I'm doing a medium dice or a large dice?
So really the best way is say get a roller, I have what's called a culinary roller, right? So it's a metal rectangular roller, and it will also have the different knife cuts listed on it. So it has a really handy guide that shows you. It has little punch outs of the metal that show you, okay, here's your 1/2 inch, here's your 1/4 inch, here's your bâtonnet, here's your julienne. So that's a really helpful reference. They're not that much. I think they're like $10 to $15 on Amazon, something like that, So I recommend getting one of those because it's metal, So I would say avoid having too much plastic in the kitchen because plastic tends to hold onto bacteria. So metal, it cleans easy. It can handle going through the dishwasher. At least mine have several times. But yeah, early on, I would say just get a ruler. Anytime you're doing your cuts, just stop, and measure up real quick with it. I've gotten to the point where, it's still good practice to check yourself as you go, even as you go further on to make sure like, okay, I have an idea visually of what I think a half inch is, but let me make sure that I'm right there. But I found that with enough practice, with it, just a few months of practice, you can usually get there without having to check yourself. Or at least that's what my experience was. I don't know. Once you do it enough times, you can just visualize like, okay, this is where it needs to be. But everybody learns at their own pace, right? But yeah, that's really, in the future, I want to do more stuff, right? I want to show some sauces. I know there's mention of clarified butter and making dashi. And those are things I'm definitely excited to show you guys. But as far as this stuff goes, that's pretty much it. Some of these stones now, of course, these are nicer stones, right? So it does cost more to get them. I would say if you're going to go for Shapton stones, go on eBay or Amazon. Don't go to the Shapton website because on Shapton's website, they'll be, 70 to 90 per stone, which I think is asking a bit much. You can usually find them much cheaper on, again, Amazon or eBay. But you don't even necessarily have to get these. This is just something that I was particular about that I really wanted to spend the extra money on since I plan to be in this profession for a long time. But even those more simple stones on Amazon, the sharp stone or something like that was the brand. Again, if it's a 1,000 grit and 6,000 grit on each side, pick one of those up. You can sometimes find it where they'll even have your leather strop and the little polishing compound all together in the one package. So again, it's not necessarily the best quality stone, but just in terms of learning, just try, grab any of your chef's knives, any knife that needs treatment that hasn't been sharpened, and just start messing around with it. And I think you'll find that it's really not as difficult as you might have thought going in. It really takes that time to get comfortable with it. And again, be willing to take that time. For food scraps, let's see. And sorry, I kind of, my thoughts are a little bit jumbled. I tend to jump around a bit. So if anyone has questions about something I say, please don't hesitate to stop me. I'm just checking the chat as well. So yeah, you mentioned about food scraps. I guess it kind of depends on what you're doing with it, right? With everything that I did, I could put this all into a curry, so I would say, curries and soups are really good for that. That's what I tend to do with the extras. Whenever I'm cooking, I'll just throw it into a container, and then those become at least part of my ingredients for the next week's Thai curry. But of course, when you're dealing with your skins, stuff like that, those will go really well into stocks. So I guess it just depends on what you need to do. But, stocks hold pretty well as long as you freeze them. So you could always do that as well. So in terms of extras that can be done with a potato, there is also a cut. Now, this isn't one that I've done yet. This one's more challenging. And this is one that, as I understand it, you'll want to use a paring knife. So it'll be your smaller size knife, 3.5 inch to 4.5 inch knife. Now, I will grab my paring knife really quick. And while I'm thinking about it, this is what I was talking about. So this is a culinary rule. And you see what I mean about how the punch outs for the different size cuts. And it actually talks about, if I can show that really quick. So this is the tournée cut. This is what I was talking about. Now, this isn't one that I have done myself. So as I understand it, it is more challenging. It is more used in classical French preparation. So tournée isn't something that you'll be doing all that much in a restaurant. I haven't asked to do it yet, but it is a skill that I guess is good to know. And you're essentially trying to go for 7 sides to the potato, and you want them to be as equal as possible to each other. Now, I have a little bit shorter and stubby paring knife, so this one wouldn't really work all that well. This is a specialty paring knife that I picked up really more for, really it's good for carving. You can't really do much else with it, but it is really nice for carving because it's so short that you get great control with it. It will also work great if you're trying to do fine work on garlic. But, most of the time, I typically tend to go for my chef's knife. And I think that's one other thing I would say too. With chef's knives, and really with knives in general, a lot of companies try to sell you on getting like the full crazy set of 10 or 15 or however many knives. I think you really don't need that many. I mean, I have 5 knives total, but that I'm just kind of aficionado. I like trying the different styles to see, what's fun to work with. But really, you're pretty good with like, 3.5 inch to 4.5 inch paring knife, your chef's knife. If you're working with bread, I guess your bread knife's always nice to have. And then your fillet knife, and those. Alrighty, and so those are useful because unlike your other knives, these are going to bend. These you want to have a bit of flex into them. I spent a fair amount of money on my other knife. This knife, because I will typically use it on meats, especially chicken, I just got something simple that could handle being thrown into the dishwasher. Now, I don't throw this one into the dishwasher. I still prefer to hand wash, but it can, if you need to on a bench. Of course, anything with a wooden handle, absolutely do not put into a dishwasher. And really just in general, don't put your knives into dishwasher because it'll just beat up the blade and dull them, Of course, with the wood, it'll cause it to swell and eventually fall apart, so you don't want to do that. But again, something like this can totally handle no problem. You'll just have to bear in mind that it will dull it a little bit, so you do have to sharpen, but, it's kind of a trade-off there. But yeah. Again, tournée, I'll have to, I'd be happy to show you guys once I figure that one out. I'll have to take a crack at that. I just haven't done it yet, so it's not one that I know how to demonstrate at the moment. But I think it'd be a good one to try on because it'll help give you an idea of learning that control that you need. And again, not necessarily a whole lot that you'll do with it beyond the classical French preparations, but it can still be fun to learn, I suppose.
Is a bendy knife better or worse than a regular knife?
Well, it just depends on what you're doing with it, right? So when you're working with anything that you're slicing like this, you'll want a simple knife like this that does not flex. Now, this is a little bit thinner blade because it's a Japanese knife, but in general, you won't have a lot of flex. Really, the only knife that you're going to want to have that flex on is one of these. And the reason for that is when you're preparing chicken, this is used, or at least I heavily use this in fabricating a chicken. And it will slide over the bones, in the body of it a little bit easier. It's also, because it's so tiny, it's really good for getting in between portions of the bird's body, which, you could do it with a chef's knife. It's not that you can't do it with a chef's knife. I mean, this really is an all-in-one knife. But I found that it's a lot harder with one of these. I think your cuts will be a lot sloppier with this than if you use something that's well suited to it. So, yeah, I'm going to clear this real quick. And so I can go ahead and show actually, I'll use this little half of the onion. That'll be fine. So an easy way, you can do with onion and shallots, even garlic, really, that method that I did with the medium dice, where I broke it down into sections, cut it sideways. You can do that to get brunoise cuts, or small dice cuts. But it's a little bit tricky, you have to have a really sharp knife. Otherwise, it tends to want to just grab the body of whatever you're cutting and kind of mash it around and throw off the alignment of things. So, I typically think that if you're going to do something like brunoise on an onion, it's a lot easier just to break it into these sections. And then from here, you'll cut off each end to level it out. And then you'll just cut it into little strips off the edge to line it up. And that way, all you have to do now is line them up with each other. And then you'll end up, after you slice, with your brunoise cut. And that is, it's kind of hard to see, but hopefully that's coming through okay. That is your brunoise cut. Now, again, brunoise cut is something you're largely going to use whenever you want it to break down and just kind of mesh whatever you're making. So, if you want that piece of whatever it happens to be discernible, I would say stick away from that and go for at least a small dice or something large. And then, if you really feel adventurous, you can go for fine brunoise this way as well. Section it out into more or less a rectangular piece, and then slice it that much thinner. But it's difficult. It's difficult. Fine brunoise is something that I try to do, but it's not an easy cut to make. So, no, again, it's one of those things where you won't have it be featured that much in your home kitchen. Again, it's really mostly sauce work, but if you're wanting to expand into sauces and learn more about that, it's definitely something that's good to know about. Let's see. Is there anything else that you guys might like me to touch on? Any particular cuts that you might like to see? Trying to not talk too much, but I'm also trying to make sure I cover everything that interests you guys.
Can you show the fine dice cut like the chefs do?
The fine dice, are you talking about brunoise?
Yeah, like you dice it really small pieces.
Yeah. So that was actually, let's see if I can pick one up and put it on. Let's go visualize it. Stick. So let's see if this will show visually. Okay, so the squares are very tiny. Now my cut ended up being slightly larger than it was. Like I said, I'm still learning myself. But what I cut, the demonstration that I did for the onion, that's a really easy way to get to that precise, really fine cut that you're talking about. And it does take a little more time. You can do the, sectioning out with the onion, where you start with the onion half, cut down from the top, cut sideways, and then rotate the onion 90 degrees and then slice through the body. You can do that to get to brunoise. I found that with an onion, it's so big that it tends to do that thing where it just shifts on you, all again, because it is sliced in some sections, it tends to just move around on you and not want to really slice through it that easily. But it still can be done if your knife's sharp enough and if you're practiced enough. You can do it that way. I think this is a lot more approachable. You know, just section it out, cut it into your more or less rectangles, cut it into thin strips. Again, if you're trying to do fine bone loss, you'll just take it that much smaller than what I did. Let me split on me. But for the sake of things, we're going to use these guys. And with these, I feel that you do definitely have to take your time because the alignment, you know, when you're working with it this small, the alignment is everything because you don't want to have any scraps going to waste and not being the ideal size for you. Yeah. Just take your time. And that, I don't know, let's see, where are we? That little white speck is fine brunoise. Now again, something that's tiny is really only suitable for sauces, but it will break down very quickly in a sauce. And yeah, that's pretty much everything I got. I mean, of course, I'm happy to talk on anything else that you guys would like. I'm happy to demonstrate any cuts you would like, but that's pretty much what I've got for the time being. Like I said, in the future, I want to show you guys clarifying butter as far as browning butter. I love working with browned butter. I need to show you the dashi, and the dashi will go into okay, sorry, I saw someone typing. But the dashi, I like using it for lots of things. It will go really well, in my opinion, with the fondant potato recipe that I want to show, because I like doing fondant potatoes, but I like do it with a somewhat. I like fusion food a lot, right? How easily can you cut carrots for a mirepoix? So with carrots, I found you typically want to break them down. Now it helps to buy the individual carrots, not the carrots in the bag. And the reason for that is the individual carrots tend to have thicker bodies to them because you more or less want to cut them the way that I did the potato, just a little bit smaller, you know, since of course you don't have as much carrot to work with as you do potato. But yeah, you more or less just cut it into that rectangular block and then cut it into those little 1/4 inch strips. Or I'm sorry, not 1/4 inch strips, 1/8 inch strips. And then, you know, you'll end up with little planks of carrots. And then once you have those little planks, stack them on top of each other, and then again, just cut into the 1/8 inch strips. And then once you have, let's just pretend that these are carrots, right? Once you have those carrots into those 8 inch strips, you'll then turn it sideways, and as I just did with the onion, you know, break it down from there. Now, so for mirepoix, that typically is 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch, but you know, sometimes you can do it smaller. Whenever I was doing my etouffee preparation, I did it brunoise cut, but I think it's just a personal preference, right? You know, the small dice cut is going to have a little bit more body to it, whereas the brunoise, it really just blends into it. So if you're making an etouffee, then mostly you'll just feel the texture of the rice, the chicken, or whatever you have put into it.
So is there like a maximum sharpness for knives?
So I would say, yeah, you know, there is a maximum practical sharpness. There are stones, you know, chef actually makes a stone, right? So they have They have quite a range. They have the 1500 that I use, the 5000. Like I said, the yellow is 8000. They also have a 12,000 stone, and then they have a 30,000 stone. Now, the 30,000 and really the 12,000 are what you're going to use if you're wanting to in a straight razor or something like that. When you need like a razor sharp edge. I think that I guess I should back up, right? If you're needing to do fine bruise, if you're only doing that really fine cutting work, then perhaps you can get away with having that sharp. When you go to that sharp, though, it's going to be a lot more prone to chipping. It's going to be a lot more prone to dulling, in my opinion. So I like to just stop at 8,000. I think for anything that you're going to do in a kitchen, or at least most things that you do in a kitchen, 8,000 or even 6,000 will do pretty good job, right? I think that 8,000 is the sweet spot, so that's why I went with that size, or that grit rather. But it really depends on your use case. Again, if you're doing a lot of fine gouache work or really want like maximum precision, you can go up to 30. But I think that 8 is perfectly fine. The 30,000 is also pretty expensive. I want to say that stone was like 200 or 250 or something ridiculous like that. So I don't see a reason to buy that, but I'm sure some people prefer it. Well, yeah, I guess, guys, we can go ahead and conclude it there. Unless there's anything else that you might like to ask about.
Does size matter when it comes to how big the pieces you chop off are? Because I know you can do it super fine or super big, but does it really matter in the long run in terms of food taste, or does it matter if you like want to eat onions or just want to taste the onion?
That really does touch on part of it. It's really down to preference on what you want it to do texturally. There are some people that don't necessarily mind the flavor of, like you said, onion, but don't want to have a bite of it. So it's like, well, if you're working with someone like that, then do the smaller cuts, do the brunoise cut, because then it will just melt into whatever you're making. But it's really just how you want it to behave in the pan, right? The smaller you go, the more it's going to break down. The larger you keep it, of course, the more it's going to hang together and stand out as its own component within a dish, which again, in my opinion, really shines whenever you're doing something like curry, because I really like to saute each of my vegetables individually and then throw them in the curry, because first they'll take on the flavor of the curry, but as you bite into each vegetable, you have that really nice, kind of smoky sweetness that you get from sauteing in the pan, and it will be a little bit different for each item. But again, with something like that, I think go with medium and large dice, because anything smaller and it doesn't really stand out enough, in my opinion, to be all that significant. Even small dice, it is discernible, but not that much, not that much more than, grain of rice and so on.
If I may add on to an earlier question about the over sharpening a blade, it also depends on the quality and composition of the metal that was used to make the blade. Certain ones can hold a sharper edge than others.
Right.
So I just wanted to add that part. Sorry.
Yeah, no, of course. Hey, I'm very much still learning myself, right? I just like to share the bit of information that I've picked up thus far. But yeah, that is definitely something to bear in mind. when you're starting out, and I suppose that's something else that important that I can touch on, right? When you're starting out, I think it's really good to use a stainless steel blade. And that's just because with stainless steel, you don't have to worry about wiping it down religiously right after you're doing your cutting. Some chefs prefer this really high carbon steel blades. And because they're harder, now they're a little more difficult to sharpen, of course, but because they're harder, they hold their edge so much better. But they will also rust quickly, so you can get stainless, semi-stainless, or the carbon steel. Carbon steel, again, you have to wipe it down. And if you don't wipe it after cutting, very quickly, it'll start rusting. And then you have to deal with the fact that it started rusting. I don't know. I might try carbon steel blades at some point, but I've been pretty happy with what I've got here. Now, this was an expensive knife just because I found this brand. I like the hammer design. I also like the octagonal handle because it gives me really nice control with this blade. I feel that it fits my hand a lot better than, say, something like this. Now, this is still a really good blade. This is the Shun Premier knife. This one is a bit more. I think these guys, you can get them on sale for like, $170 to $200, but again, it kind of depends. You can sometimes find them cheaper on Amazon. And the significant part about this is the D-shaped handle design. So it does flare out a little bit, and it's not too bad to control. It is a decent knife. It's nothing wrong with it, but it is a lot weightier than I really. One, it's almost like you have nothing in your hands. I love it so much. This one is made by. I believe this was a Yu Kurosaki blade. Yu Kurosaki. And I can share the information specifically on this one if anyone is interested in it. They are more expensive, which is the caveat to it. This guy was, I think this one was like $299 for this one. And they make different styles, with different handles and whatnot. They also have a couple different hammering patterns, but again, $299 is a lot to spend on a knife, right? So I'm not saying anyone has to spend that much to be able to be a good cook. You can be a great cook with a $15 blade as long as you sharpen it properly. This is just very much personal preference. But again, with knives, I say have a couple, but you don't really need to go crazy. Don't buy the crazy full sets. It's like with pans, right? You don't really a 30-piece cookware set. You need a couple pans. You need 5 or so pans. And your 10-inch skillet, can do most things you need to do in the kitchen. Too, I do want to mention, and I guess this ties in if you're using a blade like I'm using. When you have your wooden handles, of course, it's stating the obvious, but because it's porous, you want to make sure that you wash it whenever you're done with it, very quickly dry it, and then let it air dry. And there are going to be, I use, I'll grab this really quick and show them. So this is what I use for maintaining my knives and my cutting boards. Booz Blocks, they make, in my opinion, very overpriced cutting boards, so I don't buy their boards, but I do buy their maintenance products. And I use their mystery oil, and then I use, it's essentially like a thicker gummy beeswax polish that I use on everything wood. Now, it's really important that you make sure that you let whatever you're putting on dry first, and then you'll put, this one's the lighter product, runny, so I would say, coat it in the mystery oil or whatever you're using like that. If you're not going to use that, I would say you're fine using a decent neutral oil. Canola oil will work fine. I would say stick away from something like olive oil because olive oil just has a certain kind of funk to it. And I don't like my knife smelling like that, so go with something neutral. But this oil has really treated my nose well. This thing is like 8 months old now, and I haven't noticed any kind of issues in the handle, so I've been pretty happy with how the stuff performs. I like to let it sit overnight whenever I'm treating my handles, and then just wipe it off at the end with a towel. You're good. And I would say, again, when you're maintaining your wood handles, do that process, I think every week. I think if you do it every week, you won't have any kind of issues. But that's just me. That's just me, right? I won't spend the money on it, so I want to do my best to maintain this thing. And then touching on ways to improve outside, the biggest thing I would have to say, you can definitely find a lot of great material online. YouTube has been a really good source for me. Going to videos from Jacques Pavon, for example. He's a very well-known TV personality, and he's a great chef. He has a whole library of information on how to do different things in the kitchen. His video on fabricating a chicken, actually what I learned. And because he's very patient, he takes his time showing everything, shows you a lot of little kind of tips on how to better handle the bird that I found that weren't always covered in books. So his material is really helpful. But I would say just get into the kitchen and do it, for lack of better words. I'm definitely someone that struggles with imposter syndrome, right? I very much second guess myself. So it's easy to, at least in my opinion, right, it's easy to get overwhelmed and think like, oh, there's no way I can do that. It's too difficult. And I found, doing the school that I'm doing, it pushes me to kind of get out of my comfort zone and just try it. And by just trying it, I found that, it wasn't that bad. It tends to work out a lot better than you might think it will if you just go into it, willing to learn and willing to take your time. And I think rushing through whatever you're doing in the kitchen is the number one way for things to go wrong in terms of your outcome, but also just in terms of safety. All of my injuries, especially my first time using a mandolin slicer, I was just not thinking. I was going way too quickly. I wasn't using a glove to protect myself like I should have, and ended up opening my hand up pretty bad that I had to stop cutting or stop cooking rather that day. So really just, be patient and just the repetition, the repetition of just doing it over and over and over. And in time, you'll find that you get better. Having spent the money that I've spent, doing the culinary program, right? I think it's very valuable, right? I definitely think those instructors can help you out. But having gone through it, I think that you can also pick up most or all of this just going on YouTube, right? Just picking up a solid textbook from one of these programs, right? You don't have to spend the thousands of dollars on it. Just get on YouTube and just do it, and just, again, as much as you can, right? Of course, ingredients are somewhat expensive depending on what you're working with. So within the bounds of reason. But you can go, if you're just trying to get your down, that inform, the precision there. If you can get that precision with your knife cuts, that will inform the rest of how you cook. So get your cheap ingredients, get your white onions or your potato or your carrots, right? To have those variations in texture, because carrots are harder to work with than your potato, of course. That's why I say start with the potato, because it's easy. It's not going to give you that same resistance. It's also a little more forgiving if your knife isn't super sharp, whereas a carrot can be a little bit trickier to get those finer, julienne and brunoise cuts if your knife isn't, as sharp as it needs to be. One other thing too, when you're sharpening your knife, of course, it takes time, right, to get that process. It's an investment of your time. So I think it's really good to have some kind of cover. This is what I happen to use. This guy right here. I got this. I think this is a Mercer Culinary little sheath, and this was like $10 on Amazon. Not that much. Now, it's not a perfect fit, right? It's made to where you can slide a little locking pin through behind the back of the knife. It's not quite long enough, so it doesn't let me put a pin through, but it will still fit the shape of my blade. So, it works. It's good enough. Now, you can also find these guys on Amazon, and you can find them where they'll be in a pack of, 10 or 12 or whatever. Again, for like $10, then they're not that much. I would say just make sure you're, now if you have a knife block, right, it's a non-issue, but otherwise make sure you always guard your knife. Don't ever put it in a drawer, just out and open, because, one, you can have other things bumping into it, which dull the blade, but it also leaves a possible cut when you're trying to grab it. So unless you're actively slicing with your knife, just make sure it's covered, and that will prevent a lot of possible issues. So, it really just depends on how badly the knife has been damaged. Um, I have had people mishandle, actually, this one. Now, I sharpened it enough to where it mostly took it out, but the end is a little bit blunted. I don't know if that's really that visible because someone didn't really understand how to this knife. And they ended up putting it into a sink, which blunted and chipped the end of it. It used to have a kind of jagged edge to it, and then they put it through a dishwasher. But they didn't know, so I kind of beat over the head of it. But it really just depends again on how badly it's damaged. If you have any chips in the blade, I found that 1500 grit stone, this blue one from Shapton, this is a good point to start at when you're trying to take away that kind of bad damage. If you have anything really bad, they do make lower grit down to, I think, 100 or 150 or something like that. They make it pretty rough. But it really just depends on where it is on the blade, how much it goes into the blade. I know there's some damage that I certainly wouldn't be able to save, but I'm sure someone, if they have a proper sharpening wheel, could figure it out. So yeah, it's situational. Most cooking, as long as you're careful with your knife and you're not just throwing it around, most of the time it's going to look like this one, right? Where you won't have too much that you're needing to put. You just need to kind of straighten that edge up a little bit. I would say again, if you're going to do like me, right, the 3 stones, do a 1500, a 5000, and an 8000, and taking it through that full range. Again, depends on what has happened to that knife, on how much time you want to give it on the 1500. This one, as I take it through its full sharpening, it's not going to need that much time, right? I'll probably do 10 passes maybe on each side, and then I'll probably go ahead and keep to the 25 or so passes, both the 5000 and the 8000, just because I think it goes a long way to just making sure I get that really nice edge. Because a good test, not that it's the only one, but a good test is just taking it through a piece of paper, and if you can drag it through the top of the paper without much resistance, get a nice clean cut, then your knife is probably pretty sharp, or at least sharp enough for what you're going to need to do in the kitchen. But yeah, again, like as with the knife cuts, with sharpening, it's one of those things where you really just have to do it. You can watch all the videos in the world, and everybody has slightly different techniques they'll show you. There'll be some where they want you to, or they'll recommend, having a little bit of edge, or a little angle rather. I think, for the sake of simplicity, just have it even. Even with the stone, just drag it back toward you, and then just work your way along the blade, flip, and then work your way back along the blade. And then once you've done that, like I said, wipe off your blade and then run it across the leather strop. After you're done polishing, again, wipe it off again, and it's ready to go into its sheath. All right. So yeah, guys, I think that's everything that I have. I'll ask once more, if there's anything that you would like to ask about, or anything in terms of knife cuts that you would like to see, except of course for the tournée, since I haven't done that one yet myself. Please feel free. I definitely want to make sure that I'm not leaving out anything. But otherwise, I very much look forward to showing everyone how to do clarified butter, how to do brown butter, because I love working with brown butter. And essentially, I guess that's something I can talk on a little bit. Clarified butter, I like using it pretty much almost exclusively over normal butter, because I like being able to cook with it in a pan Normal butter, because it has those milk solids in it, it's very prone to burning. So it's good for, it can be good for some finishing, right? Typically if you make a sauce, you'll add your butter in after you take it off the heat, because if you get the temperature too high or too low, it can cause your sauce to break. So when you're using clarified butter, it has a much higher smoke point. It also, again, has those milk solids taken out of it. So I just love working with it. Now, it's going to still taste like butter, of course, right? So if you want something new flavor, I would say stay away from that. If you're getting something like ghee, ghee is just clarified butter that has been browned just a little bit, and you'll find that as you go through the cooking process, it becomes very aromatic. Then you have brown butter, which is taken a little bit further, where it's not quite burnt, but a little bit short of that. You'll have some particulate that you'll see in your pot. And so, and this is something I'll touch on when we get to that point, but you'll have to go through a straining off process to make sure you don't have anything muddling up the color of your clarified. But yeah, it's fantastic to work with. So anyways, like I said, that'll be for the next session. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about? Otherwise, we can go and stop it here. All right. If that is the end of questions, I go ahead and stop it here, guys. I appreciate you joining me. Of course, I'm still learning myself, right? So I apologize for being a little discombobulated, but I appreciate you sticking through it, and I'm happy to share the knowledge. I love cooking. It's something I'm extremely passionate about, and I very much want to encourage that passion for anyone else. So yeah, thank you for joining me, and I really appreciate it, guys. All right, take care, everyone.